As we continue our series through the book of Mark, we are on chapter 8, and we're going to look at the first 21 verses. On the surface, it looks like there's a few different sections in here, but they actually do all tie together. But in order to understand the deeper meaning, we have to understand the surface meaning. So we start off with knowing what we might call the Bible story is. Because it's a Bible story, it means it's true. It actually happened. This is the feeding of the 4,000. We've had the feeding of the 5,000. Now this is the feeding of the 4,000. See, Jesus had come to this area with the people, and he was teaching them and preaching them, and they'd been there for 3 days, and Jesus looks at the crowd and he's saying, he's having compassion on them. He's concerned about them because they have nothing to eat. This is a familiar scenario we had before with the 5,000. But this time, Jesus is the one that actually initiates basically the concern. He said, if I send them home now, and some of them have come for a long ways, they may faint on the way. And I don't want that. I want Jesus being who Jesus is. He cares about them. So he goes to his disciples, and again, what do we have available? And come to find out they have 7 loaves of bread. So Jesus takes it, and as before, they also have a few fish, and he breaks it, and they pass it around to the people, and then everybody has everything they need to be satisfied. Their bellies are full. And then Jesus sends them away. Okay. Now, as Jesus now moves into a new location, and the Pharisees come to him, and they come to him with a test. And he says, he says, show us a sign from heaven. I mean, like, you haven't seen the healings, you didn't see the feeding of the 4,000, the 5,000, you didn't see me raise Lazarus from the dead, and you want a sign from heaven? Almost interesting to think that Jesus didn't say, I'll show you the sign of Elijah as he drew down fire from heaven, but he didn't. He said, no, I'm not going to give you a sign from heaven. The only sign you're going to get is the sign of Jonah. Okay, back to the Pharisees. Yeah. So then he goes back to his disciples and says, be careful of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. We'll look a little deeper into that in a minute. Now they're traveling again, and they notice that the disciples are basically out of bread. Well, they're complaining about that, and they're worried about that, and Jesus' response to them, you don't understand? Why are you worried about the fact that we only have 1 loaf of bread? And you really think about it, that shouldn't make any sense. I mean, you just fed all these people, and there was a bunch left overs, and now we're worried that we're going to be out? How could you forget? And then the last part of this section talks about the miracle that's extremely unique. And it's where it took 2 tries for Jesus to heal somebody. Like, what do you mean, 2 tries? Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? All of these will tie together. All of these fit into each other because there is a much greater teaching than just the story. So starting in verse 1 and verse 2, in those days there was a large crowd and they had nothing to eat. Jesus called the disciples and said to them, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. See, Jesus is concerned. Jesus does care. He has that. It's part of his nature. It's part of who he is. He sees the problem. He knows that there's a solution. He knows that he is going to be the solution. We should recognize that same thing because Jesus sees our problems. He knows he is the solution. He knows our troubles. He has compassion. He does care about us. He is concerned that we are going to falter because we're not looking to him for answers. Verse 3, if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance. Here again, our Jesus, our compassionate, loving, kind Jesus, knows our circumstances exactly. He knows where we are. He knows what we've been through. He knows where we are headed. And he cares. He cares so much he's going to do something about it. See, we get help from our Jesus, not just because we asked for it, but because of who he is. With the people who were listening to him for 3 days, do you think somebody around here preaches long? 3 days, okay? Probably took a break at night, but still, that was long. But they stayed. They were hanging on and clinging to his words. Verse 4, and his disciples answered him, where will anybody be able to find enough bread in this desolate place to satisfy these people? That verse is loaded with excitement. Almost sounds like a silly question. Let's break it down a little bit. The disciples go to Jesus because Jesus says, we need to feed them. The disciples, there isn't the bread enough. They're not realizing the fact, they still haven't caught on to the fact that they are talking to the bread of life, saying that there's not enough. Jesus being the bread of life is all that is needed, because you say there's not enough to be satisfied. Well, there sure is plenty to be satisfied with Jesus, because he will fill you with everything you need, and you will be satisfied. And then the beauty is it'll even go beyond that, and we'll see. Verses 5 and 6, and he was asking them, how many loaves do you have? And they said 7. And he directed the people to sit down on the ground. And taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks and broke them, and started giving them to his disciples to serve them. And they served them to the people. As we continue delving into some of the spiritual teachings in this passage, how many do you have? In other words, what do you have to start with? And they said 7. Now it's interesting that there was 7 here, and remember the feeding of the 5,000, there was 12. Those are interesting numbers in and of themselves. 12 is quite often equated to the 12 apostles, the 12 tribes, okay? So you have kind of a unity here in that number that is speaking of God's people throughout. Now you have the 7. Well, 7 is the number of fullness, heavenly fullness. So you have God's people, and you have heavenly fullness in these 2 stories of the bread being multiplied. So if you have the fullness of God here on earth, the world has nothing to offer, but we are satisfied. We have everything we need and beyond. How many do you have? This is what we have. How many do we have here? This is what we have. This is all we need, because the multiplication is not up to us, it's up to God. God will multiply. So he gives thanks, and he breaks it, and he starts giving it to disciples. This is the same methodology that God uses today. He gives to one, that one distributes to others, and those others distribute to others, and it builds and it builds and it builds. See, there is a spiritual teaching inside of this multiplication of the loaves and the fish. Because it's the way that God operates. He operates through his people. See, God could very easily just put in the minds of 20 people to show up here at church next Sunday. But that's not how he does it. On rare occasions, he does such things, but that's rare. He literally sets it out and says, through my people, we will reach out into the neighborhoods, into the counties, into the states, into the country, into the world. I will do it through my people. And he directed the people to sit down on the ground, verses 5 and 6, and taking the 7 loaves, giving thanks, and he served them to the people. Looking at what we already have to what we will have. Verses 7 through 9. They also had a few small fish, and after he had blessed them, he ordered these to be served as well. And they ate and were satisfied, and they picked up 7 large baskets full of what was left over of the broken pieces. About 4,000 were there, and he sent them away. He started off with so little, 7 loaves. He ends with 7 full baskets, 4,000 men plus women and children fed, and you have all these leftovers. See, our God is a bountiful God. He gives much more than we need. From a little, he will produce much. Verse 10, and immediately he entered a boat with his disciples and came to the district of Dalmatha. Now that town has a meaning that there's actually a little bit of dispute depending on what source you have. One of the more reliable ones is, it means shepherd's way. May or may not be correct, and it doesn't matter that much. Just a little bit of side information. Because it is Jewish territory in the district of Galilee. Okay? Because we've gone back and forth between Gentile territory and Jewish territory. We're now in Jewish territory. Okay. Now this next section, we actually going to have to delve into the book of Matthew to get a little clearer understanding, because Mark gives the Reader's Digest version and Matthew gives more of the full story. So we'll look at both. But in verse 11 through 13, the disciples came out and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. Leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. The Pharisees are coming. They've been constantly trying to catch Jesus at something. And noticing it says it here in verse 12, it says, sighs deeply in his spirit. Jesus is not enjoying the fact that the Pharisees are constantly testing him, not for his sake, but for theirs. See, those that are in opposition to our God, it's not that God gets angry at them for their opposition. He's saddened by their opposition. The same should be true for us when we see people that have put themselves in terrible situations and whatever scenarios. We should feel sorry for them, not anger with them. It teaches us to learn to think and to act as Jesus did, with genuine sorrow and concern about others that are failing, even if those failings were brought on by their own actions. Not the attitude of, "Yeah, that'll teach you. Okay, yeah, you keep going down that road, that's going to teach you all right. You know what it means." No. Feel sorry for them. Pray for them. It saddens me that you're going through this. Why? Because I actually do care. And then we take our Jesus, and his care is a whole lot more than mine. He does care. He cares about those that are failing. He cares about those that are sinning. He cares about those that are making stupid decisions. He's not angry with them. He wants them to change and to turn. The Pharisees have this mindset of, we're going to catch them. Yeah, if we just get them on the right question, we're going to get them. And Jesus' response, I think, is so fantastic, where he's grieved because they're trying this for them, not for himself. He turns to them and says, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. Leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. Now let's look at Matthew's add-ons, the same part of it. In Matthew 16, 1 through 4, the Pharisees and the Sadducees came up and testing Jesus and asked him to show him a sign from heaven. And he replied to them, when it's evening, you say, it will be fair weather and the sky is red. And in the morning, you'll be storm today, and the sky is red and threatening. Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the sign of the times? An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and a sign will not be given it except the sign of Jonah. And he left them and went away. In Matthew's account, like I said, he adds more information. It's not contradicting, it just adds more information for us. That you people can see and predict the weather from the signs in the sky. Okay? But when it comes to things, heavenly things, you can't discern them. You can't see them, even though they're right there in front of you. There's so many obvious signs, and you want another sign, a sign from heaven. The only sign you're going to get is the sign of Jonah. Now that should be obvious. The sign of Jonah. Jonah was in the well for 3 days, 3 nights. He was in the water. He was buried. That was a definite symbol of Christ being crucified, being buried. Jonah was spit up onto dry land. Jesus was raised from the dead. And that sign they were actually going to see, because it wasn't that far down the road when it was going to actually happen. I don't know if any of the Pharisees caught this even after the fact. Some probably did. Some probably didn't. But the sign was clear. It was definitely showing this is what is going to happen. You want a sign? You're not going to get the sign you're thinking of, but you're going to get the true sign. The reality. Verses 14 and 15. And they had forgotten to take bread and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. And he was giving orders, saying, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Almost like, okay, the disciples are getting worried and concerned because they only have one loaf of bread. And they're in the boat and they're traveling and they're getting hungry. And they're concerned about that, and Jesus turns to them and says, why are you concerned about the bread? Where did we just come from? What just happened? Okay, I fed 4,000. Before that, I fed 5,000. And you 12 are worried you might go hungry because we only have one loaf. Don't you trust me? And then he says, but beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. And I think, all of a sudden, where did this come from? But if we understand leaven, what does leaven do? It puffs up. It builds up. It expands. But he says with the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod, both the Pharisees and Herod puffed themselves up, make themselves look good. They would be out there in the streets with their fancy clothes. Herod was, you might say, made himself kind of like himself like a king. Okay, so he would dress in royal clothes. He would puff himself up. See, this is what Jesus was warning about. Don't do it like Pharisees. Don't do it like Herod. You're not to lift yourself up, to puff yourself up. We are to exalt our God, not ourselves. This is why the beware. Verses 16 and 17, they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, do you discuss the fact you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Jesus is basically telling the disciples now, how can you not see that this makes no sense for you to have worries and concerns? Is your heart so hard that it's just simply not getting into you? The obvious, you're just missing it? How can that be? Verses 18 through 21. Having eyes you do not see, and having ears you do not hear, and do not remember. When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of pieces did we pick up? They said to him, 12. When I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said, 7. And he was saying to them, do not yet understand? I've provided for all that was needed more than once. I've provided for the crowds. I provided for you. You had all these leftovers, all these things that you had, more than what you needed. And now that you're running low, you're getting worried. The term, having eyes you do not see and ears you do not hear. In other words, this basically saying, it's right there in front of you. If you just open your eyes, you'd be able to see it. And it's obviously that you should be able to hear it because the noise should be deafening to you. It should be overwhelming your senses, because the part that is so obvious is that there was a need, I filled the need. There was this need and the people were satisfied. You have a need, you will be satisfied. We have needs in Christ, we will be satisfied. Because first, don't forget, Jesus called himself the bread of life. Verse 22, and they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Now, Bethsaida, at least, is a town that we actually know the meaning of the name, because we have Beth. Okay? Bethlehem, house of bread. Okay? Beth means house. Okay? Here we have Bethsaida, and this is the house of fishing. Now, it's interesting that this was a fishing community. Jesus is fishing for men. Let's face it. So they bring a blind man. Okay? So apparently this blind man has friends. Because obviously the blind man isn't going to find Jesus on his own. He needs somebody to help him. They're good friends. Okay? Good friends bring their friend to Jesus. Good friends implore Jesus to heal their friend from the spiritual blindness. They didn't realize it was still spiritual blindness, but it was actually physical blindness. See, this is the part where we talk about Jesus tried twice to heal this man. The first time didn't quite work out, so he tried a second time. Now, when we are interpreting Scripture, there's some facts that we have to always remember. One is things that look like goes a certain way, but it's totally contrary to all of the rest of Scripture. What we've been seeing all along here was Jesus' ability to do things. We also saw Jesus' care and concern for people. Even his enemies he cared and was concerned about. And we also see that his overwhelming ability to do things was not limited, because we saw him feed the 4,000, we saw him feed the 5,000, we saw many other healings. So if Jesus failed to heal on round one, that cannot be the answer. Jesus doesn't fail. So there must be another answer to the story. So let's take a look at it a little bit further. Verse 23 through 26, taking the blind man by the hand, and he brought him out of the village. And after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see men, for I see them like trees walking around." Oh, okay, didn't quite get there. Okay, you're getting close. You was blind, now you're seeing foggy. Then again he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored and began to see everything clearly. Okay, on the second try he got it right. But we just determined the fact that that can't be what happened. There has to be more understanding. See, we are the second try, not Jesus. See, Jesus comes to us, he offers us himself, and we come partially. Okay, I'm going to give you all of my life except for. I'm going to enjoy all of your favor and all of your grace except for. I think this is what Jesus is teaching us. It's not that he's failing, it's we're failing. It's not that Jesus failed to heal this man on the first try. It was this man needed more. Because every miracle that Jesus performed, every healing that Jesus did, always was done specifically for that person and to teach us. That person, for whatever reason, which we have no way of knowing, had more blocks than just sight. We don't know what it is, it doesn't matter. Because we know we have more blocks. We have things in our lives. Jesus is offering because he has compassion. He cares. We saw that from the beginning. And now, because Jesus being who Jesus is, he now completes the transformation. And the person now, instead of just seeing trees walking, he sees clearly. He clearly sees because Jesus has worked in his life. We should be able to see clearly now that Jesus has worked in our lives. Not expecting that Jesus comes into my life and now I understand and know everything and I follow him perfectly. You're lying to yourself if you think that happens. It does not. But what does happen is we begin and the growth starts. And we grow and we grow and we grow. And it actually takes a lifetime. Now, we might hit leaps and bounds here and there. But that process of sanctification is a lifelong process. And I think that's what Jesus was teaching us here with this miracle. That just because Jesus comes into our life doesn't mean we grasp all of it immediately. Because of our weakness, not his. And then Jesus says, do not go into the village. See, this is the time through Jesus' ministry when he's kind of trying to not spread the fact that he's there, so that because the people are not coming to hear his teaching, they're coming to see the miracles. They're coming for the free food. And Jesus is concerned about that. He wants the people to come and hear the message. And you're so overwhelmed by the crowds, he can't speak the message. These are the reasons that we understand is why Jesus would say to certain ones, don't tell anybody here, don't go into the village. It's because I have a message that is far more important than healing a blind man. I have a message that has much greater value than your food, than your bread. Because I come to tell you how you can be saved from that wretched sin that you're caught in. I have come here because the sign of Jonah will be seen. I will die. I will rise again. I will pay for the penalty of sin. Trust me and believe me. It may not happen immediately. Maybe you're a person that needs it in stages. Our God will listen to the stages. He did it with the blind man. He'll do it for us. Every miracle Jesus did had a purpose. And the purpose was for us. See, many times it takes our spiritual eyes need to be opened. When we look at a familiar Bible passage and we see what we would call a children's Bible story. Jesus feeding the 4,000. Oh, it's on every children's Bible book that's out there. Okay. There's so much more riches in it that we can easily miss if we don't dig and see it as a whole. Jesus feeding, we need fed. Jesus satisfying, Jesus will satisfy us. Jesus working in our lives patiently. Jesus caring about us sincerely. All of these are part of who our Jesus is.